Good afternoon. I call to order the Lake Havasu Metropolitan Planning Organization Executive Board meeting on Tuesday, February 8th, 2022 at 2 p.m. If you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And Ms. Lajewski, if you please call the roll.
Thank you. Kel Sheehy.
Here.
Buster Johnson.
Here.
David Lane.
Here.
Gary Knight.
We can't hear you. Is your mic on?
I'm having trouble hearing anybody.
All right, we can hear you, Mr. Knight. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you now. I can hear you now. Yes.
Okay, great.
Jenny Koch. Back to you.
Okay, thank you. We do have a quorum. Councilmember Koch will be here shortly. Next item on our agenda is the call to the public. This is an opportunity where citizens have to address the executive board on items within the jurisdiction of the planning area that are not on the agenda. With that being said, would anyone like to address this a call to the public? Seeing none, we'll close the call to the public. Item 5 is our meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion from Councilmember Lane and a second from Supervisor Johnson. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Item 6 is the 2045 Regional Transportation Plan. Mr. Hembry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the 25-year long-range plan we just wrapped up. We sent the draft out in October to all the stakeholders, the executive board and the TAC. And then we sent it for public comment November to December. Based on all the comments that we received, we updated the draft plan to the final plan. And that's what's presented to you today in your packet. And then we also have the Kittleson and Associates team here to give the final presentation for the 2045 long-range plan. And with that, I will kick it over to Ms. Phyllis or Vamshi with Kittleson.
Thank you, Justin. Mayor, members of the board, Phyllis Davis, thank you for allowing me to be here today. Vamshi Elisetti from Kittleson Associates is here on the phone with me as well. Sarah, is it okay if I share my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think everyone can see it. Okay, perfect. And everyone can hear me, okay?
Yes.
All right. Perfect. Thank you. And so, yes, like Justin said, we are excited to be here today to present to you the draft final report for the 2045 Regional Transportation Plan. When this project first was kicked off, it was really just set up to, one, meet the federal planning requirements. The Lake Havasu MPO is required every 5 years to update their long-range transportation plan. So it's fiscally constrained and identifies the most pressing current and future multimodal transportation conditions. And if you imagine, since the last transportation plan was completed in 2015, a whole lot has changed, not just to our transportation system, but how we're using our transportation network. So within Lake Havasu, we really saw a need not just to, check a box for this federal requirement, but to really deep dive into what the regional needs are for Lake Havasu. There's been a lot of growing demand on our transportation system from both our residents as well as from our visiting snowbirds as well as our tourists. And we've seen changes in kind of safety issues of where they're located. And we've also seen an increased need for multimodal connections and increased issues with circulation and congestion on our corridors. So at the start of this plan, we really wanted to take a step and look at this from a regional perspective. So working with the Technical Advisory Committee, we identified a network of regionally significant routes of collectors and above that are really serving as the backbone of the Lake Havasu region. So for the entire plan, our focus was really to identify what the needs are on these corridors and how we can best improve multimodal conditions along these routes. So at the beginning of the project, we looked at what are the conditions and characteristics of these regionally significant routes. We looked at what our pavement conditions are like today and what is projected to potentially have some life cycle constraints in the future that might need to be maintained or updated. We then looked at our volumes on our corridors, our traffic volumes to see where are people traveling today. As you can see on this map on your right-hand side, the bigger blue lines are areas with higher traffic volumes, whereas the lighter blue lines are areas with lower volumes. And so you can see some of these corridors like SR 95, they're really standing out on these significant routes. But we also have some internal arterials like Acoma Boulevard and McCulloch and Swanson that are really carrying a large number of vehicles a day. And then when you translate this into our congestion levels, because some corridors like SR 95 are more equipped to handle high volumes than some of our arterials and local collectors. So you can start to identify currently areas that are experiencing high congestion volumes, such as the Lake Havasu Bridge, places along Acoma, again in that downtown corridor, McCulloch and Swanson, as well as even on SR 95. So taking all of that information, in addition, we looked at the safety of our streets. So where are we experiencing areas of high crash volumes, and not just high crash volumes, but areas that are having a high number of serious injury and fatal crashes. So overlaying all this information, we can start to identify needs for today. But then we also have to look out, this is like Justin said, a long range plan. We want to say, what do we need into the future? So looking into by 2045, the Lake Havasu region is really expected to grow substantially. In total, about 7.2% in population increase is expected now until 2045. And we're also looking to have seen an increase of 14% in our employment projections. So imagine congestion today, and then you add on this additional stress and demand from the additional population and employment. So we modeled out taking our current traffic levels and projecting it out to where we see demand occurring and where growth is expected. We can then model out where we see future demand needs changing. So if you look back on our current congestion levels in comparison to what we expect in 2045, you see a lot more corridors start to show up as these higher red volumes and orange volumes. So we're just seeing increased congestion all across Lake Havasu, not just targeted straight in the downtown area and SR 95. And we also wanted to hear from the public. You know, we can use data all day and look at kind of what's happening, but we want to make sure that we create a plan that's really meeting the user's needs and what they want to see in Lake Havasu. So we did two phases of public outreach, and I'm just going to present a couple of the findings that we heard from our first round of public outreach, where we asked, one was, what do you see as the greatest need in Lake Havasu today? And we saw overwhelmingly the largest percent of those who responded were looking for reducing travel congestion on our current roadways. They're also looking to maintain our current system, but they also saw a real need of enhancing and adding in bicycle facilities and public transportation. Then we asked them kind of what should we prioritize going through to 2045? What was interesting here is we saw this reliability and efficiency, which really correlates along with that reducing travel congestion on roadways. But the public also saw a really big need for setting a priority towards safety, as well as air quality and health. So once we took this, all of this information on what our current issues are and our future issues are, we started to develop our cost feasible plan, which is the draft long range plan that you have. So what we end up doing is it's a 6-step process, if you will. This makes it look very simple. But we take all of these potential projects and ideas. So it's our wish list. We sat down with each member of the technical advisory committee to hear directly from them on top of our data analysis as well of what kind of ideas and thoughts they had of transportation improvements they would like to see in the Lake Havasu region. Once we had this big wish list of ideas, we then screened and evaluated each of the projects. We scored them against each other and against a matrix of evaluation criteria. And then we looked at to what our actual funding revenues will look like into the future. You can take any big wish list that you like and then put it on your desk, but at the end of the day, it's really about what can we actually make happen. And so a big part of this project is creating a fiscally constrained list of projects. So once we can evaluate and identify what our future funding levels are like, we then can prioritize this wish list into our short, mid, and long range improvement scenarios. So the guiding principle really behind developing the long range transportation plan is that ADOT has set up a performance measure goals for the states that they report up to the federal government. Lake Havasu MPO has adopted those goals, and that includes safety, maintaining the infrastructure conditions, reducing congestion, improving system reliability, and it being environmentally sustainable. So as those core common goals that are used throughout the state, we developed evaluation criteria. But Lake Havasu is unique on its own. So we also set up priority goals that we saw that were really needed within the Lake Havasu region. And that is additional congestion reduction, ways to improve safety and efficiency and the quality of life for our residents. We really wanted to highlight pedestrian and bicycle mobility, as well as public transportation mobility in the region. So based on these guiding principles, we developed a prioritization framework. So each of these kind of wish list project ideas were evaluated against these scoring matrix to identify what was the greatest need based on those performance measures. And then, like I said, we then projected out our revenues based on our historic revenues and then our anticipated funding and availability for the future for both the MPO, Lake Havasu, and Mojave County. And we projected out capital operations and maintenance and planning revenues. So based on that, we then identified funding programs that we could allocate these funds to. So still, again, using this ADOT performance measures and overall planning goals, we put each one of our wish list projects into 3 categories: preservation, modernization, and expansion. And based on the types of projects that we were identifying, as well as our revenue availability, we then developed federal distribution percentages of where we would like our projects to go into. So you can see we really see 65% of our funding going towards preservation, 20% into modernization, and 15% going into expansion. And I'm going to hand it over to Vamshi, who's actually going to walk through probably what everyone's really most interested in, and it's examples of what the projects are that we're looking at. So go ahead, Vamshi.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can someone confirm that you guys can hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sounds good. Like Phil said, the LRTP final report document has pretty detailed specific projects, but for this presentation, in the interest of time, I'll kind of go over some of the key recommendations that we're making as part of the long-range transportation plan. First and foremost, I'll talk about some of the traffic operational projects. As many of you know, when you look at traffic in Lake Havasu from a daily travel patterns, most of the day you don't see much congestion. Congestion typically occurs during your morning and evening peaks. And from our analysis, it doesn't look like it hits the tipping point where widening is actually needed. We feel like a lot of these traffic congestion issues could be addressed by mostly traffic operational type of projects. So what we try to do here is to get the most bang for your buck. The first project that we're recommending is look at your key corridors, which is basically Lake Havasu Avenue, SR 95, Mesquite, McCullough, Acoma, and Swanson. As you know, signals on these corridors are very interrelated to each other. So step one would be to look at these 5 or 6 corridors as a system, and then basically try to see what kind of operational improvements can be made. So you're synchronizing the traffic signal timing between all the signals on these corridors. So when you look at this as a system, right away you leverage capacity of that roadway. So that's our number one recommendation. We're also suggesting that this evaluation come up with a plan for an adaptive signals implementation and what kind of additional traffic infrastructure would be needed to improve the coordination between a lot of these signals even more. In addition to that, several unsignalized locations throughout the city are coming close to a point where they're failing. So we don't list them here, but there are several signals that we identified, several locations we identified to conduct signal warrant studies. Again, here to get the best bang for your buck, we're suggesting that you do all of these warrant studies in one shot. That way, doing them individually would be more cost prohibitive. So once we know, that study would essentially identify which intersections are prime or meet the warrants for signals. And then that carries forward into actually implementation of which signals should be signalized. In addition to that, another project is basically SR 95. There are several locations, several intersections that would need improvements. In terms of infrastructure improvements, so we're suggesting we've identified in the RTP specific locations on 95 where circulation at that intersection should be looked at in conjunction with Lake Havasu Avenue. That way, you're able to identify exactly what additional signal infrastructure is needed. And the last recommendation is the adaptive signals implementation. This kind of goes with the first one. So whatever recommendations come out of the first study in terms of the type of adaptive signals implementation that needs to be done, this essentially represents an implementation of those recommendations. Next slide, Phyllis. Safety projects, the safety plan was done for the Havasu, and then we also updated that information as part of this project. So a couple key projects that we are recommending is, again, there's a lot of driveways on some of the key corridors within the city, Swanson, McCullough, and Acoma, and Mesquite. So for those corridors, again, we're suggesting that we conduct an access management study that helps identify, which of these driveways could be consolidated to really improve safety on these corridors. Again, trying to aim for low-hanging fruit that can maximize the capacity of these roadways. In addition, there was several segments that have been identified as high crash segments that could use safety improvements. And I believe the MPO is already working with a consultant to apply for HSIP funding for these projects. That includes the Blue Canyon Road area and the county area as well. And then Swanson Avenue corridor intersection improvements, basically, on that corridor, we are suggesting that intersections be evaluated from a safety perspective. Next slide for this. Pavement preservation, here we try to focus on the big dollar pavement preservation projects. We did not include some of the day-to-day maintenance type activities in this list. So the three major ones that come to mind are the McCullough Boulevard pavement preservation. I believe the funding's already been secured for this one. That's from Smoke Tree to Acoma. And then another pavement preservation project is Swanson Avenue from Lake Havasu Avenue to Smoke Tree. This one, again, I believe the MPO is trying to secure funds through the state, through the state itself to see if they can get funds are allocated to complete this particular project. And then 95, I believe, the state has put funds aside to completely redo 95 pavement preservation from Sarah Park all the way up to the town limits, city limits. Okay. Next slide, please. From a capacity standpoint, capacity essentially means widening existing roadways or new roadways that may be needed. Again, we didn't see much immediate need, so capacity projects are pretty expensive. So we try to put a lot of these, try to maximize capacity using operations, and then the next step would be to look at widening. In the long term, what we are suggesting is Acoma Boulevard be looked at as a corridor that serves as an alternate route to State Route 95. Again, this is from Daytona Avenue to Saratoga Avenue. So what we're suggesting is we conduct a more detailed vision for what the Acoma Boulevard needs to look like, where widening could be accomplished, where bike and ped modes could be accommodated, and then how best this corridor also experiences several crashes. So we're suggesting that a vision for Acoma Boulevard be developed that specifically identifies what type of widening and safety improvements needs to be done. Another area is by the high school on Palo Verde Boulevard. It's a small segment of roadway that seems to consistently experience congestion during the school hours, pickup and drop off times. But I think just widening that small section of Palo Verde Boulevard would address this issue, and looking at some of the aerial imagery and right-of-way information, this probably could be accomplished. There may be some right-of-way available with minimal impacts to adjacent properties. And then McCulloch Boulevard by the access to the island, this was actually suggested by town staff that, since widening the bridge is an expensive proposition, one option would be to look at reversible lanes. So what we're suggesting is a demo pilot project where you could use temporary signage and stuff to test this reversible lanes option from Lake Havasu Avenue to Isle Circle Drive. That way, if it works, then you can make the signage permanent. Another issue that was brought up was there's only one way in and out of the foothills area that is growing. So we're suggesting to do an alternate route study to identify some potential routes in case of emergencies. Right, next slide, please.
If I may, I have a quick question on the reversible lanes. Can you explain that a little bit more for me?
So reversible lanes, essentially, I think right now there's 3 lanes on the bridge. What we're suggesting is when there is activities on the island, so we would make 2 lanes go towards the island. And then when the activities are done, then the lanes would be reversed, where 2 lanes would be going towards the town. So you could accomplish that using temporary signage. So we're suggesting before you make it permanent, you test it out first.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm familiar with that. Can you go back, Phyllis, one slide?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I'm confused on the demonstration pilot on bullet point 3 says McCulloch Boulevard, reversible lanes, demonstration pilot Lake Havasu Avenue to Isle Circle Drive. Is that like Sir Peter Gadsden? Is that, or Beachcomber Boulevard on the island?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. All right, perfect. All right, thank you.
Of course.
Next slide, please. We're also, from the public feedback, we got a lot of input on the need to focus on multimodal bike and ped projects. So based on input, some of the key recommendations we're making is to look at a pedestrian crossing across 95 by the Aquatic Center. So again, a feasibility study needs to be done first to identify the specific location that looks at all the constraints and the possibilities, and then makes a solid recommendation from that. Another one is London Bridge Road from Fathom Drive to 95. we're recommending that the shoulder be widened to basically accommodate safely bike ped users who would use that shoulder for bike purpose, for commuting purposes or shopping purposes. And then we are also recommending that some of the key activity centers, which are primarily, typically you have a lot of pedestrian bike activity, which is by ASU, MCC, and the Lake Havasu High School. Half a mile around these areas, we are suggesting to close any sidewalk gaps and to make sure that folks who want to walk to these activity centers have continuous facilities. Okay. I think that kind of sums up some of the key projects. Again, as I mentioned, the LRTP goes through in great detail what each project is, what kind of issues does it address, and then what are some ballpark costs for each of these projects, and then what might be some of the constraints and what are potential funding sources that you could use to accomplish these projects. Okay. With that, I'll open it up for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions of any members of the board? Yeah, thank you for the presentation. There's no questions from members of the board, but this is a public hearing. Would anyone like to address the city council on this matter? Or excuse me, the MPO board. Yeah. All right. No comments from the public. So we'll bring it back to council or back to the board. And do we have a motion to entertain on this item?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'd make a motion to approve the 2045 final regional transportation plan as presented.
Second.
We have a motion from Councilmember Lane and a second from Supervisor Johnson. Is there any additional discussion? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I say that I think they did a great job on that.
Yeah, thank you. All right, moving on to item 7 is the Lake Havasu Metropolitan Planning Organization procurement policy. Mr. Hembry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in the packet that went out, you should have received a slight reading assignment of 182-page procurement policy, which I know it was pretty long-winded, so I'll get straight to the point on that. Really, I guess the ultimate question is why a procurement policy now for the MPO when we've been operating for 9 years, pretty much with a fiscal agent as the city? So to answer that question, it's really 3 things. First of all, we already follow the processes and procedures that are in this policy. The MPOs and the COGs pretty much follow a hybrid system, if you will, of state procurement code and federal procurement code. Because we're subrecipients of federal funds, our contracts and a lot of the things that we do it's required that we have various, provisional language and terms and conditions in our contracts. There's different record retention processes that we have to follow. But then because of our contract with ADOT, that is, our contractual piece of that, we also have to follow state code, the state accounting manual for travel rates and those types of issues. So first off, 99% of this policy we already do. It was just a way for the MPO to formalize it in a document, so it gives us guidance and clearance on what exactly does the MPO follow? What is that hybrid? So for instance, even though the city follows state code and ADOT follows state code, because we're federal subrecipients, there's other steps that we have to take as an MPO during our processes and our planning activities. The second part of that is this policy in no way recommends any changes as far as how we interact with the city itself. We're not asking to change their policy. We're not asking to change how we interact with them. We would still use US Bank, the purchase cards, the Oracle database. Any new vendors that the MPO would get would have to be registered with the city, but then also they would have to be registered with ADOT as well. So that's where that hybrid state federal kind of comes into play. So really it's that last 1%. Why are we doing this? Why did I create a 180-page document? It was not for fun. And it really boils down to if we're going to have to apply the federal compliance and jump through all those hoops, the added benefit is the magic's in the thresholds. And there's 3 thresholds. There's a micro purchase, small purchase, and then what would be the formal or competitive solicitation purchase, that larger one. So in Exhibit A, that's the meat and potatoes of this entire document. Is what we're asking for is to adopt the federal thresholds, where micro purchase is 10,000 and under, meaning that we wouldn't have to go out to bid or get quotes. Anything under 10,000, we would be able to purchase, no questions asked. However, there's a caveat. Because we are contracted with the state, anything over 5,000 has to be approved through our work program, and the work program has to be approved through the executive board. So we're not asking to change any approval levels either. Everything that applied before today, before this policy existed, applies tomorrow if this were adopted. So again, we're not looking to change city processes. We're not looking to have carte blanche to go on a shopping spree or to change the approval levels through the executive board or through the city. It's really that middle threshold, that simple acquisition from 10,000 to 250,000 is the federal acquisition threshold versus the state at 50,000. So as of today, if we want to go out for, say, a planning project, anything over 50,000, we have to do the request for proposal, the RFP process. With it, review panels, extra documentation, go out through the newspaper. It adds 3 to 6 months to the process. If we adopt the federal process, that threshold goes up to 250,000, not 50,000. So there's still the oversight by the executive board on everything we do, but we now have the added bonus of we don't have to do the RFP process until we hit the 250K threshold. So the reason why I'm asking for the policy to be adopted and the reason why we put this together was the IIJA is coming out, the new federal authorization, the new bill, the new funding. We really, now that we've adopted the long range plan, we see a lot more projects that we would like to scope or do additional data analysis or engineering analysis. There's a lot of projects out there. There's a lot of grant funding opportunities. We'd like more assistance at the MPO to be able to consult out and to develop these projects in preparation for the IIJA for grant opportunities. So very much like what we're doing with our HSIP process, where we hired a consultant, they came in, they crunched the numbers, they're helping us with the grant applications. That's what we're trying to accomplish with the new federal threshold. So again, 99% of the policy and procedure, already doing it, already have to follow it, no questions asked. That we just have to as federal subrecipients. So really it's that 1%. It's the thresholds are what would change. We would change from the state thresholds to the federal thresholds, but we would still have to go through the proper channels for approval on all of our contracts, any of our capital requests or expenditures, budgets, contracts would still have to go through this body as the governing board. So with that, I know that's a lot to digest and there's a lot there on that policy, but I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hembury. So right now, that would allow you then to select the firm you want to work with, as far as like to scope different projects and those types of things?
Correct, up to the 250,000 threshold.
Okay.
So if we had 100,000, if we budgeted 100,000 through the work program we just need some kind of scoping of whatever project it may be.
Mm-hmm.
We would still want that good qualified firm, but we don't have to go through the actual formal solicitation of a RFP. We can just send out emails to a consultant list of, say, informal on-call list, if you will. It's more informal, but we could send it out for quotes. Say, okay, we found a firm that's willing to do data collection for us for 75 grand. The other firm's more expensive. We decided to select this firm. And that would give us and the MPO board that authority without having to go through the RFP process.
Gotcha. So once you pick that firm, so you send it out, you get 10, you get bids back. You're like, all right, we want to use this company. Then you bring it back to the board for final approval.
Correct. All final contracts, and even then actually a step further. So first we have to budget it in the work program, mm-hmm. which the board approves. And then the contract itself, yes, would then have to be brought back for quote unquote, the purchasing agents for the MPO is the executive board chair, the statutory agent, which is the city attorney, and then myself. Without all three of those signatures, contract doesn't exist, and also approval by the board. So like I said, that formal approval process for the MPO does not change, nor does this recommend any changes to that process.
Okay, perfect. Any questions from any other members of the board?
Mr. Chairman, no questions. It makes sense to me. Cut out some of the red tape. We still have our checks and balances in place to make sure we're doing things the right way, but it'll streamline the process a little bit, and I think that's a good idea.
No, great. And it's going to bring in more bidders, hopefully. So actually we should get better pricing for some of these scoping projects.
I think so.
Mhm. All right. Are there any other questions for Mr. Hembry? Hearing none, this is a public hearing. Would anyone like to address the board on this matter? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for possible motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion from Supervisor Johnson and a second from Councilmember Lane. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we're ready to vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you. Yeah. And then also, just for the record to reflect, we do have Councilmember Koch who has joined us sometime throughout this conversation. So welcome, Councilmember Koch. And item 8 is Title VI training. Ms. Lajewski.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's that time again for the annual Title VI non-discrimination training.
Yeah, could you move just a little bit closer to the mic for those? Thank you.
So what is Title VI? Title VI prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin in any program or activity that receives federal funds. The purpose of training. Training ensures all agencies, contractees, and beneficiaries follow the minimum requirements to comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964's laws and regulations. What do you need to comply with Title VI? To comply with Title VI, you must appoint a Title VI coordinator, attend ADOT Title VI training, and provide training for staff, committee, and executive board members, develop a Title VI policy statement, and post it in visible areas or verbally read during virtual meetings. Acquire a signed Title VI assurance and include it in all contracts. Monitor race, gender, and national origin of contractors and subcontractors. Subrecipients such as the MPO must ensure contractors and subcontractors who have been awarded ADOT-funded contracts follow the same guidelines of Title VI civil rights laws and regulations. General requirements for all Title VI programs. Summary of the public outreach and involvement activities and descriptions of steps to ensure minority and low-income people have meaningful access to activities. Limited English Proficiency Plan, or the LEP. Producing a tracking and investigation Title VI complaints. List of any Title VI investigation, complaints, or lawsuits. Title VI notice and instructions on how to file a discrimination complaint. Subrecipients must have a written Title VI complaint process and complaint log. This should include how to file a complaint. The complaint should be in writing, signed, must be able to determine jurisdiction, accessibility, and be able to provide additional information during the investigation. The complaint must be filed within 180 days of the alleged occurrence. The complaint filed against the subrecipient should be forwarded to ADOT for investigation. The final action is within 60 days and provides appeal instructions. On the next two slides, you will see the LHMPO Title VI complaint log and the Title VI notice to the public. Public outreach and public involvement. We provide the opportunity for the public to get involved in proposed transportation decisions. We promote public participation, often allowing accessible meeting times and locations. We utilize social media such as Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube to involve the public. And we also use non-traditional methods such as virtual Zoom meetings or even setting up a booth at our public events here in town. Limited English proficient related requirements of Title VI. Title VI requires that LHMPO to engage with the individuals from different cultures, backgrounds, and businesses in planning projects and other program areas. Individuals who do not speak English as their primary language and who have a limited ability to read, write, speak, or understand English can be limited English proficient. How are LEP plans implemented? Publishing material in languages other than English, multi-language public outreach materials, pictograms, multi-language announcements at reception areas, language identification using I Speak cards. General requirement summary points must include policy statement, signed Title VI assurance, organization and staffing, program area review procedures, data collection, training, complaint procedures, distribution of Title VI information, limited English proficiency, and environmental justice and public and participation plan. If the recipient does not comply with Title VI, they can withhold the payment of the recipient until the recipient complies and/or cancellation, termination, or suspension of the recipient's contract. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you for that review. Are there any questions of members of the board? All right, I don't think there's any formal action that's required on this item. Okay.
No, Mr. Chairman, just for background on that. So we do training annually, but specifically this year, we were trying to sneak it in because we are going to be audited by Title VI every couple years. The Civil Rights Office floats around to the various programs and makes sure that we're complying with that federal, Title VI compliance. And part of that is, like Sarah mentioned, training to our TAC and our executive board members. So the good news is I did go through the audit last year with Western Arizona Council of Governments. So we've reviewed all of our Title VI. We should be ready to go. Kudos to the MPO in the past. They really do have Title VI compliance, ready to go. So
perfect.
We should be good.
All right. Well, moving on to item 9 would be the Rural Transportation Advocacy Council report. Is Mr. Adam with us this evening or this afternoon?
I am, Mr. Chairman.
Hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to join you. Obviously, there's a lot going on, as is typically the case this time of the year, and probably this year it's way up there on the charts. And with the federal, I think at this point, most of the focus is on implementing the infrastructure legislation that was enacted back in November. We've already seen increases to the formula funding that ADOT has to work with the 5-year program. Over the course of the year, I think you're going to see the rolling out of various new programs when they're ready to kind of get up and running. About a week and a half ago, we saw notice of funding opportunity for RAISE grants, which used to be Build, and it was Tiger before that. Each new administration sort of rebrands it. But basically that has wide transportation eligibility as far as the types of projects that are eligible. And I think what's really significant this time is that the funding nationwide increased by 50%. So there's $1.5 billion that will be available. So I think the odds of having a favorable application, whether it be the state or locals, has gone up considerably. And over the course of the year, we're going to see additional competitive grant programs get up and running. There is one that is specific to rural infrastructure, which we don't have the timetable as far as when that will be there. But I don't think there's any question that there's going to be a lot more funding opportunity with the federal funding. And then fortunately at the ADOT level, the board had a study session last week, and the infusion of additional revenue, it appears that it's going to have a very favorable impact on the next program update, where we're looking at ADOT is now going to be able to meet their maintenance targets every year, in fact, surpass them. So if you look at their charts at how bridge and pavement conditions are trending, it's been downward for a couple of years, and we've kind of stabilized that, and are actually looks like we're starting to slightly inch up on, in an upward trend. So that's all very favorable. And then ADOT also indicated that where they had been going towards a maintenance only operation in a moratorium on new construction in Greater Arizona based on funding, that now, in fact, they will have an expansion program where they'll be able to have new construction every year in Greater Arizona for the foreseeable future. So, and it won't be a massive plan, probably just a couple of big projects every year, but it's certainly movement in the right direction. And that brings me to the state. And first off, I should say, and this kind of leads back into the federal, in the governor's budget proposal, he included a 50 million, what he is calling SMART program, which would provide funding that would only be used in Greater Arizona. And it would require ADOT to set up this program where they would provide assistance to rural local governments with applying for some of this federal competitive grant funding. And that is everything from the application process to administering to providing the local match requirement with the grant. So that hasn't been enacted yet, and we haven't seen a bill for it, and the bill's not necessary. That could be something that's negotiated into the state budget when they're ready to draft those budget bills. But I could see that program providing local governments with a lot of support to basically make those federal grants a lot more viable for you. And so obviously I'll continue to keep everybody posted as we get new information on the federal side. As far as the state budget and the state legislature is concerned, while I don't foresee there being any permanent increase in transportation revenue streams, there is going to be I think let's put it this way, the state is very flush with cash. I think they're going to have a lot of revenue to work with. And it does appear that they are going to prioritize transportation with some of that additional revenue. And that will be more than likely in the form of earmarks to provide one-time funding to various projects across the state. And of course, RTAC, we did put a bill together that where all the COGs and MPOs were able to prioritize projects from their region, and collectively we're going after a 50 million appropriation to fund those projects. That includes some funding for pavement rehab on Swanson. I believe that was the Lake Havasu MPO selection. Through WACOG, there are also a couple of Mojave County road projects included as well. Last week, that the bill, House Bill 2396, we were able to get it out of the House Transportation Committee with an 11-1 vote, where it is now ready and will need to clear the House Appropriations Committee. And that's where we're encountering a challenge with your representative, Regina Cobb, who chairs that committee. And I want to make it clear that in the past, she's been very supportive of directing one-time funding to transportation projects. And I don't think her position has changed there. But where we are having a problem is that she is opposed to local projects be included in the state budget. I believe her thought on that is that it's the state budget and it should only include state projects. And of course, if you look at how revenue sharing works, state collects a state gas tax, a state vehicle license tax. There are various permit fees that are transportation related. Local governments are precluded from having those types of taxes on their own. And in exchange for that, they receive roughly 50% of the funding that the state collects, which is then used on the local road systems. So if the legislature is going to increase that HERF, or not HERF, but if they're going to increase transportation funding through earmarking rather than increasing HERF, then I think it's only appropriate that local projects are included in that earmarking. And so, but with that said, obviously, Ms. Cobb is in an extremely influential position, that not only as far as getting that bill out of her committee, but she also plays a very integral role in putting together the state budget, where these projects would ultimately need to be included to get the funding. So any support that you can provide in contacting her and asking her to sort of reconsider the inclusion of local projects, that bill and all of the projects, including those that we have in Mojave County, as well as the three cities that make up the Tri-Cities. Those projects are at risk without her changing that position. And with that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Adam. Are there any questions of members of the board? All right. Well, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to item 10 is the ADOT District Report. Mr. Steinberger.
Good afternoon, everybody. Just a couple of quick updates. We're progressing along with the pavement preservation project on the SR 95 corridor from Soda Park to I-40. I know that the city has voiced some concerns about the scope of work and everything, and on the project. So we're going to have a meeting with Mr. Steve O'Brien, our project management group manager, on Monday to discuss this a little bit further with the city and other elected officials. And then also, too, I know that signal coordination and everything on the SR 95 corridor is very important. And Justin Hembry and the MPO, they're willing to earmark $1 million to coordinate Lake Havasu Avenue and SR 95 signals. And just to give everybody an update on that, we're meeting internally tomorrow with our traffic signals group to discuss coordination plan moving forward for the corridor, and then also what we can accomplish with the funding that the MPO is willing to provide. And then we'll set up a meeting after that to discuss further with the MPO and the city staff. Those were the only two updates I had today. Does anybody have any questions for me?
No, it seems like you know the questions I'm going to ask, and you got ahead of me. So thank you for that. Are there any questions, members of the board?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Hey, Todd, any update on getting the resident engineer position filled?
The district administrator position, Councilmember Lane, we are currently recruiting. Hopefully our management will be having interviews over the next couple of months, and hopefully we'll have somebody permanent into the position sooner than later, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of the board? All right. Thank you, Mr. Steinberger. Item 11 is the Arizona Transportation Board report. Mr. Knight?
Yes, thank you. The board held its its January meeting here in Yuma. There were a couple items on that agenda for that will concern Mojave County. There was a consent agenda item 3J, which is the Kabawash Bridge. The board approved a little over 2.6 million to Vasco Inc. For the replacement, remove the existing bridge and replace with closed frame continuous concrete slab bridges and additional work, which includes approach slabs, barriers, pavement markings, and miscellaneous work. So that project was approved by the board and should be moving forward now. There was another project which I have to say was reject all bids, only because there was, it happens to be Parker to Bullhead City, SR 95. It's also a bridge. But there was only one bidder, and that bid was considerably over the department's estimate of 1.3 million. It was the only bid was 2.1, which was about almost $800,000 over the department's bid. So the department is going to resubmit that. They're going to take a look at the dollar amount, and their estimate is probably going to go up a little, but they want to make some changes so that we'll get some additional bidders. They questioned some of the other firms and found out why they didn't bid on it, and so they're going to try to put out a new request that will answer those problems, and we'll get, hopefully, I don't know that it'll be any cheaper, but it will be, hopefully we'll get a little more competition. We'll get some additional bidders, which probably will bring it in less than it came in this time, but it's probably going to come in more than what the original department bid was, but that's going to change too. So that's where we're at on that one. Those were the only two items on the agenda that had anything to do with Mojave County. So that's why I brought those forward. The next meeting is next week on the 18th. It will be in Flagstaff. As far as I know, it's going to be open to the public and virtual. It'll be a hybrid, so you can do it either way. If you don't want to weather the cold temperatures and do it virtually, that's the way I'd like to do it, and I could, but I'm not. I'm going to be there in person. And unless anybody has any questions, that concludes my report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. Knight, from any members of the board? All right, thank you, Mr. Knight. All right, moving on to item 12, any future agenda items? All right, our upcoming meeting schedule, the next PAC meeting of the MPO will be on March 22nd, 2022 at 1:30. And then the next meeting of this board, the executive board, will be on April 12th, 2022 at 2 p.m. And then, as Mr. Knight had mentioned, the State Transportation Board meeting next week, February 18th, 2022 in Flagstaff. Before we adjourn, Mr. Lane?
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. As those of us here know, I've been on this board for over 6 years, or over 5 years, on my 6th year now. And last week during our city council retreat, and we divvied up the city council assignments, I thought it might be a good idea to let somebody else learn what it is we're doing with the transportation here in Lake Havasu and across the state. And Councilmember Campbell, who happens to be in the audience today, has stepped up to become a board member and take my seat on this MPO board. So this will be my last meeting with you all. So I just wanted to say what a pleasure it's been to work with you all. I've made some really good friends here, and I appreciate all the support that I've received from everybody here. And I look forward to meeting with all of you again over the next couple of years while I'm still on the council, but it just won't be on this board. So thank you very much.
And Mr. Chairman, on behalf of myself, the MPO, and the predecessors that I followed, we're truly grateful for your service, Mr. Lane. You've been an excellent board member and friend and confidant over the years for the MPO, and we truly, truly appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah. Excellent. All right. With that being said, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. We are adjourned. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.